our show is it's going to be unique.
You are what you do. You can say any amount of things that you want to say, but what you do is what everybody sees.
People are like, oh, I'm just going to JV it. Like, let's just JV it. Like, what the hell does that mean?
I cannot tell you how excited I am to hang out with you guys today, so thank you so much.
Well, then that end buyer could come back and say, well, I didn't fully understand that it was subject to.
That's not a thing. Like, the SEC has thought of all of these things. They've been here since 1932.
And you can do what you want with your property.
Buyers have time, they have negotiating power, they have options.
Oh my gosh, I am blown away by your inexperience, and they've been in business 20 years.
And that includes things other people put on your property, right? It's your property to be okay. Suddenly, Cousin Jimmy's in a lawsuit.
A novation is replacing one contract or one obligation with another.
Out with the old, in with the new.
Yes.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the show. Today, we're talking about the real truth about rentals and fix and flips. I'm Andy Fowler, and I'm here with Sean St. Clair. If you're new to the channel, go to, you can find us at YouTube, Facebook, and X. Want you to go to YouTube, subscribe, like. It helps us out a ton. You can find us at the handle at INREM Podcast. That's at INREM Podcast. Also, you can download an audio version of the podcast, whether it be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other major podcast platform. You can go there, download it, like and subscribe. Helps us out a ton. With that, we're going to go to Sean, who has our legal update.
Thank you, Andy. So my legal update today is the impending deadline to comply with the reporting requirements under the Corporate Transparency Act. So as pretty much anybody who's, out there in business, real estate investing, using LLCs knows, there is a deadline here of December 31st, 2024, in which to file your beneficial ownership information for your LLCs with FinCEN. So that's the agency that is required to collect data regarding beneficial owners of limited liability companies, corporations, and other entities, so that they have that information on hand, and basically they know who's behind every LLC that exists. Now, there are some exceptions that apply. The biggest exception is the inactive LLC. So an LLC is deemed inactive if it doesn't hold any assets, if it does not conduct any business, and this is critical, it was formed prior to 2020. So if you formed an LLC after 2020, but you formed it thinking, oh, at some point I'm going to use it to do business, or maybe you were planning to engage in a certain business, but it kind of fell through and you never did anything with it. You never even got an EIN for it. It has no assets, doesn't have a bank account, doesn't, basically you've done nothing with it. It's a shell. It's just sitting there having been formed. Well, unfortunately, if it was formed after 2020, you have to report, which means you have to go and get an EIN for that LLC and then report the information to FinCEN. And the question has been asked, well, what if I don't want to get an EIN and I just want to terminate this LLC because it's useless? It means nothing to me. It has nothing. It's pointless at this point. Well, the deadline to terminate has passed. So there's no going in and terminating the LLC without complying with the CTA reporting requirements. You can go and you can terminate, but you still have to go and get an EIN, and you still have to report information to FinCEN, which is a bummer. But nevertheless, anything after 2020, formed after 2020, must comply, regardless of to provide this information. The penalties can be substantial. I mean, it could be up to $500 a day fine for intentional violations. It could mean jail or prison time. So a criminal conviction. So definitely make sure that you're taking the steps now. I mean, we're in December. So now's the time to start taking those steps to have this filed. I know there's been court challenges out there. We've had shows talking about the court challenges and whether or not this would ultimately, the CTA would ultimately be deemed unconstitutional. I think a lot of scholars, legal scholars, believe that it will be determined to be unconstitutional. The problem is that hasn't happened yet. We have a court in Alabama that did declare it unconstitutional, but only as to those plaintiffs that brought the action. It wasn't a nationwide injunction or declaration of unconstitutionality. And so it's there, it exists, it has to be complied with. And so make sure to take the steps you need to comply before the end of this year.
All right. Thank you, Sean, for the legal update. A couple reminders and announcements. It's Tuesday. That means every Tuesday afternoon we have the Creative Finance Collective. That is 3 p.m. Arizona time. That's Arizona time, 3 o'clock p.m. We go live. So adjust your calendar accordingly, depending on what state you're coming from. But we go live on X, YouTube, or Facebook. But what is the Creative Finance Collective? That is just an opportunity for attorneys in the space of creative finance to get together and talk about what they're seeing in the space, legal issues that we're running into, and we're there to answer questions. So if you have questions, we get together and we stay on as long as we're getting questions, or for as long as an hour. So join us 3 p.m. Arizona time. Come on, ask your questions. There's no question that we're not able to take, although if it deals with specific legal advice, we might do what we can to find you a lawyer or refer you a lawyer that is in your state that you're coming from, because this isn't just a one state specific show. Neither are the participants. They come from all over the place. So 3 p.m. Arizona time, they're Creative Finance Collective. Also today, if you have any questions for us or our guest regarding today's topic, feel free to post those in the comments. We'll get to those in the final 15 minutes of the episode. You don't need to wait till then. You can post those questions in the comments as you think about them. So if you're like me, you don't forget them. All right, with that, we're going to get into our topic today, and we're talking about rentals and the fix and flip market, but mainly we're really talking about the process and the investor space of turning your real estate into a rental. And with us to discuss that is Ingryd Hernandez. Ingryd, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. This is a complete honor, and it's really exciting to kind of see things going full circle. I've had the opportunity to have Sean actually help me as my lawyer for one of my more famous deals, I think, in the mentorship that I'm in. So it's kind of exciting.
Well, that just tells me you've been in the space for a long time, because it's only a matter of time in business before you're going to need a lawyer. So you've been through it. Yeah, you've earned your stripes, so to speak. Ingryd, so I know you're a real estate investor. Why don't you, for our listeners, kind of give us a background of you, how you what you do, and how you got into doing what you do?
Yeah, certainly. I've had my real estate license since 2013, so I am a practicing real estate agent. But back in 2020, when things, started to go to poop with the pandemic, I really was like, why did I get into real estate in the first place? And it was because I wanted to own properties and secure myself a bit more with real estate. And so I joined the Sub 2 mentorship in January of 2021 after being skeptical of all the stuff that was out there. And really, that's when things kicked into gear and started buying property beginning that December of 2021. I've done wholesaling. I've done buy and holds. I actively fix and flip now. My husband is also an agent, so generally people come to me with still those needs, and then I hand them off to the hotter spouse, which is my husband. So, but yeah, that's how I got started. Now I own 14 properties and actively fix and flip, and that's how I got started.
Well, it sounds like you've done a good bit, or been in or tried real estate investing from a number of different angles. Do you have a preferred? Is rentals your preferred, or do you just like to kind of move with the market and what's being given to you?
Yeah, my perspective is that I'm a utility player. I played sports most of my life, and when I played softball, I was a utility player, and it was whatever the need is, I will fill in that gap. So I kind of take my investment in a very similar approach. However, but like owning rentals and being a buy and hold investor is a very different strategy than wholesaling or actively flipping, because it takes a lot more time, attention, brain bandwidth. So my preference is to buy, my favorite way of buying is just a seller finance, free and clear property. I'm coining this, but I know I didn't come up with it, like, because I had to help a few new investors learn like a straight line amortization instead of doing like your typical amortization, so that we can entice people who have free and clear properties to sell us their property while they can actually leverage it, kind of like an annuity, right? Where it's interest only for for however long we keep it, and we try to do a ratio between like 50 to 70% interest only to the seller, where we're still paying down on the principal. So our friends called it the Ingryd method because I was teaching them, but like that is my favorite way of buying, where it's a free and clear property. We don't have to deal with anybody being scared of the due on sale clause. But, having been mentored by Pace Morby, I do recognize I'm a little bit risky. I'll buy whatever.
So Ingrid, you've been in the space for a little bit, and you like doing rentals. Our show today is about rentals. I think, boy, the investing in real estate for the purpose of making it an income producing property through rentals may be one of the oldest forms of real estate investing that we have. But in the age of social media and YouTube, there's a lot of, quote unquote professionals that'll tell the world how easy something is to do or not to do. But just to kind of start out, what are some misconceptions in the real estate investor community space are out there about rental properties and rental property investing?
Oh, absolutely. The top two that I can think of are it's passive, when I have yet to experience that. And then the second is that you don't need that many to live off of. And I would say in this day and age where we want everything to kind of happen right away, not to say that that isn't correct, but it doesn't happen right away. Like it's going to take 7 to 10 years before you can actually make that be the way you can leverage rentals, living off the income from them. So, again, I started buying December of 2021. So relative to how long I've bought my first buy and hold, I'm not there yet. So even owning 14, I don't take any money from those rentals. It's all reserves, and making or hoping that nothing drastic happens with my properties. But I've had the ill experience of having things go wrong with my rentals, and luckily for me, having that more conservative approach has allowed me to take care of those issues. From ACs going out to a booking.com guest, messing my property up and booking not actually covering it. So, and that was a $20,000 problem that I had to be able to fix. So, yeah.
So let's break down those two misconceptions. So the first one is it's not passive. What do you mean by that? I mean, the money comes in, right? Is it only not passive if you're involved and don't have a property manager, or is it not passive even if you have a property manager involved?
In my opinion, it's still not passive even when you have a property manager. I have a few that I do self-manage. My long-term rentals do well without having me to put a property manager in place. My other portion of my portfolio is co-living, and it's short-term, midterm. And because those strategies, those rental types are very active in terms of guest turnover, taking care of the properties, that sort of thing. Even with my property managers, I'm constantly having to approve certain maintenances, and things happen that, a pool pump will go out, or hey, trash didn't go out when it's supposed to, and now you have a violation with your HOA. And so there's things that come up all the time. My long-term rentals, though, I do self-manage those because they are less of a burden. But it's December 3rd right now, and one of my long-term rentals hasn't paid the rent yet. So like now I have to go and ask me like, hey, when are we going to receive it? I haven't seen that you've actually scheduled the rent. I use platforms that allow me to collect the rent without having to ask for cash or checks or whatever. Like that was one of my lease requirements, that you have to pay through this platform because I won't accept payment other ways.
And then on the second item, you talk about, hey, I need, you need volume in rentals to basically live off of, to not have to, have another job, if you will, or do other investing, that provides, more active income, if you will. What do you mean by that? I mean, you said you have 14 rentals. I'm thinking, okay, 14 rentals times, say an average of $2,000 a month, which is probably on the low side. That's a lot of money per month. But it sounds like that's not enough. And explain what you mean by that.
Well, when you have these rentals, things go wrong with them. So I'll give you an example. My very first sub-2 property that I bought in Houston, Texas, I've had to replace both AC units. And so I need cash to be able to do that. And then I had to replace it again, fighting the AC company, and they're like, nope, you're out of warranty, when I was literally a year and a month since they replaced them. And then like I was mentioning, the other $20,000 that I needed to come out of pocket to fix the damage that a guest created. There's been pool pumps I've had to replace, a pool heater I've had to replace. And so and then especially in Arizona, if you're in the short-term, mid-term rental market, expect that you might have 2 to 3 months of each property not actually profiting. So for me, I've had to cover months where we didn't have a guest as a result of it being down season. So for me, I treat rentals more of a wealth management tool and not a cash flowing tool, meaning I take the depreciation against my taxes and manage the active income I'm actually producing through my wholesaling and my fix and flipping, rather than using it as a way for me to take money to actually live my life with, because something comes up with. And usually the people that come across me, like I say, hold your reserves for a good 4 to 5 years. So like the money you're making from your rentals, whether they are short-term or midterm, and then start taking from them. Like you really need to build that nice piggy bank. I mean, I just went through, again, a $30,000 with my Houston property. And then my property out here in Surprise, like that's been another 5 to 10 grand that we've had to be able to spend on. So it's like, if I had not been just saving the money I was making, I would be in a tougher financial position.
Now, Ingryd, knowing this, okay, these two things alone, knowing that this is going to be really a profession, right? This is going to take your time to do. This is not just something that's passive and money's just going to show up in your bank account while you sit and, collect sun rays in the Caribbean or something. And you know that it's probably going to cost, just managing property. There's going to be some unforeseen costs that go into this. I have to imagine that this impacts, after you've have some experience with this, your purchasing or acquisition strategy coming into the property, knowing the room you're going to have to do to deal with this, what it's going to have to look like to get in. So now, a little bit ago, you talked about one of your preferred methods of acquiring property. We can talk more about that. As we get into that, I want to kind of break down for somebody who's listening to this and thinking, well, I've always thought about getting into this. How should I be looking at getting in? I want to break down the different acquisition strategies that there are. We can talk about the costs and benefits of that and lead into why you like your preferred one. Let's start with the most obvious one, the straight cash purchase. Talk to us about the advantages and disadvantages of that.
Well, I will add, knowing what I know now, maybe that's kind of where you're going with a little bit of your question. Would I do it again? I'm actually really happy about my ignorance to getting started, because many personality types, including my own, would have analyzed it to death and maybe never actually jumped in. Whereas I feel I am a problem solver and I'll figure it out. So I think if you have a figure it outable, attitude, that you'll figure it out. But as far as cash, part of understanding how to buy cash means you need to know how to underwrite, because the risk there is you might pay more than the product is worth, right? The property. I actually love cash deals if they're deeply discounted and if you can leverage what they call the BRRRR strategy. So buy, repair, rent, refinance, and then repeat. That's the BRRRR method. So if you're buying deep enough, let's say 50 to 60 cents on the potential dollar, right? Like the ARV, the after repair value. And then it takes you 10 to 15% to fix it up. And then when you refinance, you're able to refinance at, 70 to 80% ARV. Well, now you technically, other than the time and effort spent on it, now you have a free property that may have even paid you back when you refinanced it. So that's an actual tried and true way of buying. And I would say it's probably the best way for people to buy if they're getting started, because part of becoming an investor is building out your net worth. And why do you want to build out your net worth? Because if ever you're in a jam, you should have the ability to actually leverage that as an asset that will pay you something back in order for you to maybe handle an unforeseen cost or something like that. So I actually love the BRRRR method and buying at a deeply discounted price. And it's why I fix and flip, which is the way that you also buy flips as well as rentals.
What about borrowing from a third party? I think everybody kind of understands what that means. The first one we were talking about, cash, of course, assumes you have the cash to get started, right? So a lot of folks that are looking to get in think, well, I don't know if I can wait that much time or want to wait that much time to have the cash. Maybe I've got the credit worthiness or an income from some other job to be able to justify doing that. What are the risks and benefits to that? And is that even a technique that you like or even would recommend?
Well, it's the only way that I do it. I was actually spoiled when I first started fixing and flipping. I've had this mentor from my corporate life, because I've had a corporate job, a high-paying corporate job for the last 20 years, which also allowed me to create some very good friendships and relationships with folks who I worked with. And one of them was a very strong mentor in my life. He taught me how to become a better leader. And luckily for me, he exited a software company. He sold it. And so when I first got started, all I did was private money lending with him. So he would give me the acquisition amount and the rehab amount. What we would do is we would review my underwriting. He had some background in real estate. And then once I did the first two with him, he's like, off to the races. We don't need to have this review time. Like, I trust the way that you look at the numbers. So I would say before you even think about borrowing money, you have to build up your skills first to underwrite. And so that other third parties can trust you know what you're doing. And that took a lot. Like, I literally every single day would take properties that I could potentially buy and I would start doing the money math. Like, money math is my favorite thing. And I would go and see, okay, if I were to buy this is where I would buy it at. And then some properties I would follow through where a wholesaler tried to have me buy it, but I didn't buy it, and see if my numbers ended up where they should be. So it was really helpful to build my confidence when I would see, oh yeah, they did sell it for the price that I had underwritten it for. Arguably, I think it's one reason why it took so long for me to do my first deal, was because I was building up those skills. I mean, at the same time, I did have that privilege. I had a high paying day job. So in the evening, I would come home and I would practice underwriting every day. I would pick a property or two and I would do the math, so that I was building up my skills without any risk, right? Like I could figure out what my math looked like. And then and obviously it's really hard to figure out who has this perspective, but when you're borrowing money, whether it's hard money or it's a private money lender, there is a great responsibility to that. You know, I've had 2 flips, I'll say, go sideways, and I've always paid my private money lenders back. So I took the hit as the flipper, whereas my lenders never had to be worried about whether or not they were getting paid back. So I take a great responsibility on making sure that I make people whole.
Now, this process of underwriting, it makes a lot of sense why that's important. You've brought it up a number of times, so it's important to you. Obviously, a monumental factor in doing what you do. In thinking back, kind of in hindsight, and some things there is, that's I think the lesson we get from the internet is everything we're told or we're marketed that something can be fast and easy, and the reality is all things of value and worth take time, and take effort. So maybe there is no other way that you would have gone through this. But how does a young person, or I should say a young person to the industry, new to the industry, how should they be thinking, or what maybe would you have done, or would you have done anything different to begin honing those skills of underwriting? Or is it just as simple as what you said? Look, plan on spending nights. This is what it's going to look like.
Yeah. I'm a young person, Andy. No, I'm just kidding.
I am not.
No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
I honestly, every time somebody comes to me for coaching or feedback or can you be my mentor? I'm like, oh God, I don't have time. Really take ownership and accountability for your skills. And if it's real estate investing, rooted in the word of investing, is you have to understand the money math. If you cannot understand the money math, you're going to put yourself in precarious positions because you should be able to explain how you came up with the number you came up. And I think that is the most pivotal and important aspect of becoming a real estate investor in any aspect, whether you're flipping, wholesaling, buying rentals, even banks. Like I always tell people, continue to stay bankable, keep your credit score good. Like you have to be able to pivot in whatever way possible, right? Utility player. You have to be able to pivot. And if you can't, like you can sound dumb to banks if you can't spell out and how you came up with the math. And then you're losing your shot also to grow relationships that matter. So I think every younger person or new to this industry person should spend time like being really honest with themselves on whether or not they understand those skills. And if they don't have those skills and maybe they're more focused on the sales side, that they're teamed up with someone who's going to be able to do that for them.
So the final 2 kind of acquisition strategies that come to mind are, in a high interest rate environment or a higher interest rate environment that we're in, everybody likes to talk about the creative finance, the subject to space. You mentioned Pace Morby. Obviously, you're familiar with that. And then, of course, you mentioned just the straight up seller finance. Tell us what you like about the 2 and what to watch out for and why you like one over the other.
Yeah, I kind of see them as two different things. One side, you're having a third party or a bank qualify you. On the other side, you kind of own the control of that to a large extent. The reason I like more seller finance and subject to is because we can work at the speed of money, where when you're working with banks, you're working at the speed of their systems and processes, and time is money. So the longer that takes, the worse off you are, in my opinion. I remember actually the Morby method that Sean helped me with. I cried during that process, and it like I'm not trying to be funny, but like legitimately, like the process of getting a bank loan was so tedious. And I'm somebody like they would request something of me and I would send it right away, and I'm like, why am I being the ideal client here and you guys are prolonging this more and more? So it became really difficult to deal with them. And so I didn't like that experience. It kind of turned me off to doing things more traditional. And really how quickly I can work with a seller finance or a subject to scenario. I mean, I can have a property closed in 2 weeks, and I can even do it faster than that. But the reality is like the more you can work with sellers as quickly as you can, the better. Because for the most part, sellers who are in a scenario where they're more amendable to having those types of offers, they're usually looking for expediency. So I find that tends to help more scenarios than not.
So then that brings us to kind of the last strategy. There may be others, but these are the four we've listed out. But the last strategy, which you've already indicated is kind of your favorite, which is a straight seller carry, right? So the seller owns the property free and clear. They're amenable to carrying back the paper, and so or providing the financing. And so talk to us about your strategy there and what that looks like and why it is your favorite.
Well, the most ideal scenario is like the one I bought a property like that in Sedona. It's a luxury condo. The seller had originally bought it in 2020 or 2021 for 600,000, and then found a condo that was more suitable for her down the way in Sedona, and so wanted to put her property back on the market. And she's like, "It's been 2 or 3 years. I'm sure I'll get at least what I paid for it." And there it was sitting on the market at 600,000. Nobody was paying for it. She had reduced the purchase price down to 550. Still nobody was even looking at it. So she was pretty upset. I had a wholesaler reach out to me, and then I reached out to the agent. I paid the wholesaler $5,000 from that referral. And, we were able to buy the property. Forgive me, it's a wholesale fee, but I gave them a wholesale fee. But what happened was I was able to offer her 600,000, pay $50,000 down payment, and it was a zero interest. So that's like the most ideal, right? Give the seller what they're looking for, making sure what they're looking for actually makes sense to the property they're selling, and get a zero interest scenario. That's the absolute best case scenario, right? The other is what I was mentioning before, the straight line amortization, where I think a lot of folks win, including the seller. I'm in the space where we help a lot of seniors. So when seniors are ready to go to assisted living, having a paycheck that they can count on is very helpful, and oftentimes complements things like especially if they're Medicaid or they're on Social Security or anything like that. So having a long extended installment sale, they actually like, as a result of moving to assisted living. So in those scenarios where there's free and clear properties, they may agree to a partial interest only purchase. So like 50% to 70% of my monthly payment is interest only. And so I'm paying principal on it still, but once you amortize them, you'll see it, they go anywhere from 485 payments to 600, and yes, it daunting, because if you're paying 50% interest only, you have to realize that when you're done amortizing, you've literally paid for the property twice over. But there's greater good in here. Like you're allowing for somebody to make their asset work for them beyond the scope of what the property is worth. Second, if it was an investment, they're paying a lot less in tax benefit, or tax liability. And then thirdly, again, you're talking to seniors. So now their asset is paying them beyond the amount that the property is worth. Even if you have a balloon payment, let's say 10, 15 years out, now you get to refinance, and the amount that I've paid down entirely is still not as significant as it would be doing a normal mortgage payment. However, the reason I will put these together that way is because I get to negotiate my monthly payment. So I'll give you an example of one that I'm working on right now. The seller wants $580,000 for their property. Their property is maybe worth a little bit less than that, but I told them, if you allow me to have a $1,900 a month payment, I can make that work and do a half Z's, half interest only, half principal only. I think that one amortized into like 512 payments or something like that. But he's going into retirement. It allows him to have stable income, and it works for me because the payment is so low. It works for him because his tax liability is lower, and he's going to get a premium price for his property, and I can still cash flow as an investor. So it's just got a lot of wins around it.
Mm. So when you're looking for a property, now that we've talked about the different kind of acquisition strategies, now we're moving towards finding the property that you like. When you're looking to purchase a property, are you looking for a property that's listed as a rental, being used as a rental, or are you looking for more something that has the potential? There may not be a rental in it, but there's some work I can do to make this a perfect rental. Or does it matter? Are you looking for anything? How does your thought process go into that?
I'm looking for seller problems to solve. I would argue that it's less about the property with me and more about what is the seller's problem that I'm solving. And then secondary to that is the property, because any property for the most part has a price that will work. So if I can, solve for both, which is what does the seller need and what's the problem that I'm trying to solve for them, and I can also mitigate what's required for that property, whatever state it's in, whether it was a rental or not, then those are the types of deals that will work out the best. And that's like the feel good story that I'm constantly chasing. The thing about real estate, it's pretty benign, right? Like, hey, I bought a thing, I made it look prettier, I sold it. Like, for me, those things are pretty empty. I'm not a huge person who's into design and being creative and things like that with properties. I do want to be proud of the products I put out there that I fix and flip, and properties that my renters are in that they're happy and proud to rent from me. But if I'm being honest, I'm generally chasing the story of how do I help sellers and get that helper's high, if you will, from being able to solve problems that they wouldn't otherwise know how to solve.
Well, let me break that down a little bit, because sometimes the seller's problem might be they're just not getting the price that they want. And so when you say a seller's problem, are we talking really about properties that sellers are having, or a seller's having trouble in kind of the normal course of a real estate transaction, just moving it? It's not moving for whatever reason, because it's needs to be rehabbed, or it's got a problem tenant, or a variety of different reasons. Is that safe to say kind of what you're looking for? Something that's not moving without some problem being solved?
Well, again, I'm a utility knife. So because I have my license in the state of Arizona, if the property is in great shape and all we need to do is list it, that's what we'll do. If it's a property that needs fixing before I can buy it, then of course I'm going to offer accordingly. Usually it's the seller. I'll give you a recent example. My neighbor across the street from me was in pre-foreclosure. And I'm like, there's no way any of my colleagues in sub 2 are going to get this property when it's in my own street. So I was door knocking his house like every other day, because I was like, I would speak through his Ring doorbell. I'm like, hey, Cody, I know you're in there. I can help you. He finally answered back. And when we looked at his potential equity, I know that I'm persuasive enough that I could have been like, hey, your house does need some upkeep. It's going to be difficult to sell it. Let me just give you a cash offer, blah, blah, blah. But my husband sold that house a couple of years ago, and it was in good condition then. And so I was like, whatever the problem is now, it's really that it just wasn't upkeeped as well as it could have been. And so we told him, look, we'll help you, because he had no cash. I was like, we'll help you fix up the house a little, because at the end of the day, if you're thinking about the people you're helping more than you're thinking about your own self needs, you will make the right decisions. And the right decision for him was to put it on the market, despite it needing some cleanup. Like, we spent almost $4,000 or around that much helping him put the property to market. And we just upped our listing fee to cover our costs, and that I can go to bed and sleep at night and know that I actually helped somebody the right way. So that's why I say it really just depends on the seller. I've had a seller where the house was in great condition. They could have just put it on MLS, but they're like, no, we wanted this house to actually appreciate, but we're going to be in a whole different country. I don't want people walking through my house to list it. Like, what are my options? And a subject to scenario there was the best thing, because I could offer them market price. We put their equity on hold, so it's a silent equity, and we will be able to pay them out when it matures and when they get back from Korea. So they're in South Korea right now, they're military. And so again, for me, it's like chasing the story and the help more than chasing the property.
So now talk to us about the where. And what I mean by that is, how do you like to find these deals? Where do you like to go to locate them? Or is it just as simple as, like you said, your utility knife? You'll go wherever you got to go to find it. Walk us through that.
Yeah. Well, my ideal scenario is to buy them here in Arizona, because I do feel like being local to my market, at least right now in my evolution of owning real estate, I really just don't have strong reserves where I feel more and more comfortable like owning two out of market. I mean, I'll go to Vegas, for example, I'll buy here, and I'll buy Houston. Those three areas, I have really strong network where I can call on people who I really, really trust to help me get through any kind of problems I might have. But where I get my leads, making friendships with really great lawyers is a great way to get leads, by the way, and be able to solve some of their problems, right? Like probate attorneys are really great. Again, in my space, because I help a lot of seniors, being able to talk to lawyers who deal with trusts and things like that. Because oftentimes, like, a senior is trying to make a decision of moving into assisted living and making sure that they have their final things in order, including estate planning. And so those are probably the best leads when they come from either lawyers or senior assisted living facilities, because oftentimes in that space, a senior is trying to move into that community, but because they don't have friends and family and things like that they can trust, and even when they have friends and family, they may not move fast enough to help them. It on average takes 6 to 9 months from them to go from being able to get their final affairs in order to moving into that assisted living community. I was a caregiver for 8 years, and I know that once a senior knows they need to go to assisted living, that's a potential ticking time bomb, because a senior staying home and not being cared for in the way that they should be cared for, they may not make it to that assisted living place. So when I get involved, I can help them move into that community as short as 2 to 4 weeks. And it's all in the way that we help solve them. Like, for example, we'll give a no interest bridge loan, which is really just an advance on the offer that we make on their property, so that they can get cared for right now before something terrible could happen to them. I have my own experience with that with my husband's grandmother, who I was very, very close to, that had we made a decision much sooner, she may not she may have not passed away. And a lot of that has to be with, we don't tend to work with urgency. And we should be when a senior has identified they need to be in an assisted living place.
So once you've acquired the property, and or I guess maybe even in contract to acquire the property, and let's assume for the sake of this question that you're not acquiring it with a renter, but you're acquiring it with the idea that you're going to be renting. For those who are just kind of getting into the space or thinking about it, I know every property is different, and what you're going to do to it's going to differ from property to property. But are there some things that you kind of know right from the start going in are some immediate kind of rehab work you're going to have to do to get this prepped for a rental?
Well, yes, I'm gonna give you a lawyer answer, even though I'm not a lawyer. It depends. No, I'm just
Ooh, that was a good one.
I'm sure you get that a lot.
Right.
Well, I would say it depends on the level that you just purchased, but there are things that people should be doing to understand. If you're shooting for a specific rental amount, you need to be able to look at other properties that are renting for that in your area and compare. Does your property have similar amenities? Does it have a similar look and feel? Does it have the same number of rooms and bathrooms? Does it have a pool? Does it not have a pool? So all of those things will be a factor on how quickly you can stabilize your property to rent. So you have to look at it with unbiased eyes, which is really, really difficult. So generally speaking, I always recommend, even if you don't use a property management company, that they give you an opinion. And oftentimes, if that's all they want to do is they want to give you an opinion of what are some of the things you should consider doing with your property before they'll take you on as onboarding. So for example, one of my business partners, they own Habu Property Management. And one of the things that they do is they'll figure out, like where your property sits, what's its best use. Maybe it's co-living because it has no HOA. If you just put in, an additional $30,000 and make a couple more rooms, you can actually rent by room instead of doing your traditional long-term rental. So you want some of this unbiased feedback. So for me, firstly, do that. Secondly, understand there will always be costs to first putting your property on the market, whatever that might be, right? It might be $2 a square foot for painting, for example. It might be, or linear, whatever measurement type that they use. Are your toilets in working order? Because I've had a scenario where I bought a brand new luxury condo, right? That Sedona property, and the toilet kept going, and I ended up having to pay a huge water bill, and all it took was a new $75 toilet to not have that happen, right? So everything is an assessment. You should have a checklist, though, to say, here's the things that I typically will look for to see whether my rental is prepared. Again, reach out to a property management team. They already have this checklist for you, and all you have to do is walk your property and check to see, okay, are all of these things available and ready to go in my property? And if not, be prepared to spend the money to do it. Because even if it's anywhere from $5 to $10,000, I promise you, if you don't spend that money now, you will end up spending that in multiples later.
So we've talked about the different acquisition strategies. Some of them, like subject to, potentially may not require much out of pocket, but you're going to probably have some closing costs and different things that you have to pay there. So you're into this property, and it needs some work. And you mentioned at one point, potentially up to $30,000 worth of work to make it, a co-living space, or to make it so that it's rentable. Where does this money normally come from?
Well, it comes from my rich uncle. No, I'm just joking. For me, it comes from creating relationships and building trust with other people who want opportunities to grow their money. So for example, I recently had a friend reach out to me and said, hey, my sister has money in her self-directed IRA. she hasn't made a decision of where to invest it for the last 2 years. And so it's sitting there not making any money. I said, okay, well, I have this long-term boring rental where I can pay her 12% and secure her $30,000 against the property. And is she okay with long-term? She's like, well, yeah, she actually would love something 7 to 10 years. And I was like, perfect. There are some conditions in the way that the note is written, though, like where it says at 5 years we can extend. I don't know. There's some weird things with IRA, I believe, maybe. But yeah, that's one way, which is but this is why you need to buy properties, in my opinion, that have some equity. I think the alluring part of sub 2 is buying properties and not worrying about the equity. But when it comes to emergent situations like, hey, my guests have flooded my property. For that one, I ended up using a business credit line that's at 0 interest for a bit until I let the property pay it back. But this is why you need to continue to be bankable. So for me, business lines of credit is a way to help yourself in an emergency situation. Having properties with equity. So if you needed to do a private money loan through somebody who has like a self-directed IRA and whatnot, that you can do that with, and they can feel comfortable with tying themselves up to your property, or potentially needing to sell some of your property to make up for some of these debts. So this is why it's important to buy the right way. And again, I'm of the opinion you should buy with equity. Like that's the tried and true investor mentality.
So Ingrid, we've been talking primarily about rentals, and we could go for another hour and a half asking you rental questions. We did say that we wanted to talk to you a little bit about fix and flips as well, because that's a good bit of what you do. So with a little bit of time we have left, I want to ask you a few questions about that. Kind of jumping back to our first question with rentals, I want to ask the same thing with fix and flips, which is, what do you think are common misconceptions out there right now about fix and flips? And I think fix and flips is kind of an interesting one, because some markets, it's like printing money, right? Some rando could go out there and maybe do a fix and flip and get lucky and fall into it and think it's the easiest thing in the world. But I'm not sure we're in that kind of market right now. You got to know what you're doing to do it right. So what are the misconceptions out there right now with fix and flips?
Yeah. I think the misconception which you're jumping on is that we are in the same forgivable market that we used to be back in 2020 and 2021, when things were really heated and appreciating at an abnormal rate. I actually really love a boring 3% appreciation a year sort of market. And let me explain why. This goes back to knowing your money math. When you can better predict what is going to happen in the end, because fixing and flipping, whether you like it or not, is a very speculative game. You don't know when, the president of what the heck was it? The Fed is going to say, okay, we've never historically done this, but we're going to move 2% in less than a year, right? And that's when I actually lost money. And when I reflected back, I'm like, I could not have predicted that, despite the best money math underwriting I've ever done. And I was supposed to make, I don't know, I think it was like over 150 grand on this flip near Austin. Instead, I lost like 50 grand on it. And so it's like, imagine that. I had to buy really well to have what is essentially a $200,000 spread, right? So there's some things you cannot predict, and that is the gamble you take with real estate investing with these extreme economical circumstances. But for me, I love a steady market, because then I can say I'm going to sell it for that and then work my way backwards, right? I'm going to sell it for that $450. It's going to cost me, $70,000, $80,000. Here's a $10,000 reserve, and then my goal is to walk away with at least $50K. That's generally my math. People haven't adjusted either, like the cost per square foot in actually fixing property here in the state of Arizona. When you're in a high appreciating market like Arizona, because that appreciation is there, it also means the cost of goods in that market are also higher. So there's things that move in parallel, and people forget that. So like our price per square foot right now on a reno is between $50 and $60 per square foot. So when you're doing the renovation math, and that's your average reno, you have to take that kind of math into account when you're trying to figure out like what is it going to cost to fix something up, and then if there's any major systems. We're now going into the time frame with a lot of properties here in Arizona that require new sewer pipes. That was something nobody was really accounting for, 10, 15 years ago. Now they have to, because many of them are failing. So one of the top things I ask is, what year was this property built? Because if it was before 1975, I'm expecting I have, new pipes to replace. And if I'm replacing new pipes, I need a deep enough discount in order to buy that property and just at least bring it to the modern era. So so let me recap. Misconception. One, that the appreciation in your market is going to help you. That's no longer the case. Two is how much things actually cost when you're renovating. And then the last one, which I didn't cover, is who you partner up to do your work is going to be critical. So you need a great project manager, a great GC. Sean St. Clair reminded me that in the state of Arizona, we've always had this rule that says anything over $1,000 requires a license. And I'm like, oh, they just haven't been enforcing it until recently, because California came down on fully enforcing it. And so now Arizona's taking the same approach. So you can't just have, your cousin do certain deals or certain upgrades. You have to have licenses that align with the projects that you're doing. So that also brings costs up, though, because in order for them to carry that license and be vulnerable for, buyers to come back and say, oh, you did a shitty job. And sorry, I cussed. I don't know if you cuss here, but and sue your sub, for example, you have to protect them as well. So all of those things are now things that you have to think about when you're fixing and flipping.
All right. Ingryd, this has been really good stuff. Really appreciate you taking the time. Tell our listeners how they can find and connect with you.
Yeah. I'm most active on Instagram. And that's Ingryd, Ingryd_Hernandez. Once you type my name out, I'm usually one of the first ones, because it's just a different name of doing it. And then I'm on YouTube. We do a live podcast every Wednesday from 1 to 2 Arizona time. And we talk a lot about real estate topics, but, from an investor point of view. But we would love to have you guys on if ever you want to think about it. So.
Well, that would be awesome. We'd love to do it. And we appreciate you taking the time. Really good information. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Ingryd. With that, everybody, that is our
Thanks,
show.
Ingryd.
Make sure to join us next week, and we'll see you then.
Have a good day, everyone.